Hello and welcome to my video. I am the proud owner of 3 of these 18 3XX trucks. I wanted to give my kind of thoughts and reviews of these trucks. There's lots of reviews of people unboxing and driving these things, and they get really favorable ratings, mostly just for how far they are to drive right out of the box. And they're really fast, pretty maneuverable, pretty easy to handle, really easy to have fun with. I've lived with these for a couple months now, and I wanted to give kind of another view of these trucks, which is what it's like to own one and what breaks first, where you can get parts for them, parts from other vehicle lines that will work with them. And because that is, if you want to keep these trucks running, you're going to have to do some maintenance on them. There's certain parts that are particularly weak, and they are going to go, and they are going to go quick. And it's helpful to have some resources to find out how to get them back on their wheels as quickly as possible. So quick review of the car, just in case you're not familiar with these, but these are available on Banggood and a couple other sites for about $50, $55 shipped, which is super cheap. That's why they're really appealing to a lot of people. They're all the same components, essentially. There's 6 different part numbers. There's the 18.301 and 02. There's the 311 and 12, and then the 321 and 22. And they're pretty much just different body styles, but in different colors. But they're all the same. So this review will apply to all 3 of these trucks. So first thing to break on these will probably be the drive shafts. These go from the front and rear differentials out to the wheels, supply power to the wheels. They're plastic. They have 2 pins on the end. 2 of the pins go into this little axle or hub that goes into the wheel, and the other pins sit in the differential. These just are not strong enough. We actually broke our first drive shaft, I think, on our second battery pack of one of our cars, and the head just snaps off. One of these, this one's particularly interesting. This one's about to break. You can see how, like, on a new one, the pins start basically parallel. On this one of the heads has been turned almost 90 degrees. And if I get close enough, you can see how the plastic is just starting to spiral and kind of crack, kind of pull away. Yeah, this one's got about 5 more minutes of life on it. Unfortunately, the manufacturer does not supply metal dog bones. They only supply plastic replacement parts. And if you just keep buying plastic ones, I mean, we break them about every time we take the car out for a new run. So you really have to get metal dog bones if you want to keep these running with little hassle. I checked a lot of other 18 scale platforms, and I only found one platform that has a compatible dog bone, and that is the WL Toys A959 platform. It's another 18 scale truck. They have a buggy and a monster truck, and this is their metal dog bone. We can do a couple measurements to compare the sizes, but essentially they're the same dimensions. This is the HS183XX dog bone. See, it's about 55 millimeters in length, 54.5, and then from pin to pin, from the outside edges, it's about 51 millimeters. And this one is 52 millimeters by about 49 millimeters. So it's a couple millimeters shorter. Luckily, there's enough, the way that it sits in these cups, if it's a couple millimeters shorter, it just means it's going to sit there instead of there. So that's okay. The one modification you have to make to these dog bones relates to the cross pin. So this is the part that sits in the differential, and on the stock part, it's 7.2 millimeters, and on the WL Toys replacement part, sorry, that was the one I already modified. On the WL Toys part, it is 7.8 millimeters. So on the wheel side, that's fine. It'll sit in this cup, and it'll sit inside the bearing because the inner diameter of the bearing is 8 millimeters. Got 0.2 millimeters clearance, or 0.1 radially. But this side, the side that sits in the differential, is too wide. So you need to get it down to about 7.2, might as well go to 7 millimeters. And you can just do that with a Dremel or something. You just get some, you can even do it with sandpaper, or stick some sandpaper on the bench and just go at it the old-fashioned way and take about 0.5 millimeters off of this width, and it will fit in your differential. And that's pretty much all you need to do. Pretty simple. You can get a set of 4 of these on Amazon, which is the best part because you don't have to wait for shipping from China. You can get these off Amazon, free shipping, set of 4 for about 10 bucks. So definitely order a set of these when you get your car. You can order these from Banggood as well. They have WL Toys models on Banggood, and they have a set of 4 of these. They're about the same price on Banggood as they are on Amazon, so you can get them wherever. But definitely get some of these dog bones for your car. The next piece that's going to go is probably the differential. So let me get a car apart. So again, the differential, these are the dog bones are right in here. This is what we just talked about replacing. The differential are the set of gears that take power from the main center drive shaft and send it to the outer wheels. And there's a front and a rear differential because this is a 4-wheel drive vehicle. And the differentials stock are plastic gears, and ours started going after about a week of regular driving, and both of them were fried after 2 weeks. So these are not fluke failures that I'm describing here. All of this stuff has happened on multiple vehicles, and it's happened at regular intervals. So these are not kind of quality control failures where sometimes you just get something and it breaks early. These are clearly design failures. In other words, these parts have met the end of their life, and just so happens that the end of their life is very short. So the stock gears are plastic. They do supply or have available metal differential gears for this car, which is very good. And you can get those from Banggood as well. This is the Banggood part, and I would recommend ordering 2 of these with your car as well. They're $6 a piece. And so it's another $12 upgrade. There's some interesting thoughts. Before I get into other parts that you could use, you will need to do one extra bit in addition to simply upgrading metal gears to plastic, or plastic gears to metal gears, and that is you will need to shim the differential. I will probably have to make an entire other video on this, but essentially the way the differential sits in the housing, it has a little bit of play side to side, and that allows the gears to separate and strip, and you really need to put shims between the ball bearings and the differential housing in order to prevent that from happening. I did an upgrade on one of my cars where I just put the metal differential in without shims, and it stripped on the first battery pack. It was just toast. So you really have to make sure that you get all the play out of your gears. It's kind of tricky, it takes some testing, but it's really necessary. And the differentials in these trucks have been going for about a month, so I'm not saying it's infinite life, but it's significantly longer. These are the shims that I'm using on these trucks. They call them 10 millimeter shims, but what's important, the important dimensions are the outer diameter and the inner diameter. So this 10 millimeters is referring to the inner diameter of the shim. These are actually 12 millimeter outer diameter and 10 millimeter inner diameter. So they're going to sit on the outer race of the bearings that are on the differential outdrives. And then they are of varying widths. So you can get the appropriate amount of shim that you need. You can even stack them if you need something more than 0.3 millimeters. So these are on Amazon. I'll put links to all the parts in the description so they're easy to find, but this I got from Amazon. Unfortunately, I had to pay shipping on this, so it's double the price essentially. But okay, there is a way that you can use Latrax parts for the differentials. The differentials in these vehicles are essentially clones of the Latrax Teton and pre-runner differentials, which is, that car does not have a good reputation for differentials. They're really known for stripping. So you can get Latrax's differential kit and use that in your car. If you just want to go down to your hobby shop or something, you already have the car, you don't want to wait for parts from Banggood, you can do that. But the catch is the Latrax part does not come with a pinion gear. This is the gear that goes on the main drive shaft. And if you have a plastic pinion gear, going to a metal spur gear, that pinion gear is not going to last long. So you have to replace the pinion gear when you replace the rest of the differential. Latrax has a separate part with the pinion for the drive shaft. So essentially, if you want to use Latrax parts to replace the differentials, you have to buy two kits. You have to buy the metal differential gears, and then you have to buy the metal spur gears. All right, I wanted to put one of these differentials together to talk about the differences between this differential and the Latrax differential. And again, to illustrate the importance of shimming. So the shimming is going to prevent the differential from moving side to side in the vehicle, and more importantly, it's going to prevent this from slipping away from the planetary gears, which are in the middle there. So these two go out to the wheels, and if this starts to slip away, you lose engagement, and that's when you start stripping your differentials. And the reason this is such a problem with this differential as opposed to other ones is that it doesn't have a sealed or a fluid-filled cavity for the planetary gears. So this is all just like kind of floating around in the differential housing. But compared to a Latrax differential, the pinion gears are the same. They have the same pitch, but the outdrives have a different pitch. So this, you cannot take this outdrive and put it on a Latrax differential because the planetary gears and the outdrives are a different pitch. You can take a Latrax pinion and run it on a HS or a stock pinion or a spur gear because they are the same pitch. So you can do that. There is another difference between the Latrax pinion gears and the manufacturer's pinion gears, and it's kind of subtle, but it's definitely important to know about. So this pinion is for the from the manufacturer, and this pinion is the Latrax pinion. And the difference is in the notch that keys into the drive shaft. On the Latrax gear, it's much less pronounced. It's further away from the center. So when you put the Latrax pinion gear on one of these cars, there's a lot of play. There's a gap between the flat spot and the drive shaft, and you have to shim or fill that gap, or else the pinion gear is just going to rock back and forth. It's going to have a ton of slop. So I do have this on a couple cars, and I'm using it, and it's okay, but it's kind of wonky because you have to fill in that gap with some shims. Okay, and finally, the last thing about the differentials is that you need to grease them. When you put this back in the car, you really want to avoid any dry metal on metal contact. So I just use some bearing grease, just regular old stuff, nothing special. If you have some white grease that you use on your bike, you can probably put that in there. Normally on most RC diffs, again, like I said before, they have a fluid-filled cavity around the planetary gears, and that cavity is filled with oil of various weights, because that oil also controls how easy it is for one side of the differential to spin versus the other side. This differential does not have that, so you don't have the oil to lubricate, and you got to use grease. The other effect of that is that you have a super loose differential in these cars. If one wheel feels any looseness or loses any sort of contact with the car, all the power goes to it, rather than kind of maintaining some power in the wheel that's sticking. And basically what happens is that the car high centers really easily. If you try and drive this like just on a walking path in the woods, you'll get high centered on sticks. If you go into the brush just a tiny bit, you'll high center and your wheels will just start spinning. So it's kind of one of the main drawbacks of this kind of differential. I would like to experiment in the future with locking maybe the rear differential. So just, epoxying this all together so there's no power transfer or no power difference between the wheels, just to get better, at least always have some traction in the rear wheels, and it would also reduce one point of failure. I wouldn't have to worry about the out drives stripping. On these differentials, or on the plastic ones, I have had both types of failures. I've had the outdrive strip, and I've had the pinion and spurs strip. So, locking the differential will only prevent the outdrive failure. You could still strip your spur gear. All right, the next upgrade I'm going to talk about is not strictly essential. The previous two, if you don't do it, the car is just going to stop running. You won't be able to drive it anymore until you fix it. This one, your car will technically drive, but it gets pretty ugly. And this is the hub bearings or the wheel bearings. These cars come stock with bushings in the hub carriers in the front and rear. And that's fine, especially for like, something that's not really high performance vehicle. And the problem with the bushings is not necessarily that you're giving up power to friction, it's that they wear on the hub axles so significantly that your wheels just start to develop this horrible wobble. And if you drive the car, it's just really gross. So on this car, I've replaced the bushings with bearings, and I've also had to put in new axles because they got worn down. And these wheels are much tighter, and if you run it, it's just way cleaner. So, what do you need to replace the bearings? Let's take this car apart. Alright, so here we have the hub carrier off the rear. Try and give it a wiggle so you can see kind of play it has. And if you take the axle out, you can actually see the source of the play. So for example, if you measure the diameter of the part of the axle that hasn't seen any wear, it's about 7.95 millimeters, so that's basically a slip fit on the inside of the bearing, which is 8 millimeters. But if you look above that, you can see where the material's been worn away. And if you measure that, it's like 7.6 millimeters. So we've lost 0.3 millimeters. It doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're on this scale, that can create a ton of wobble. On the bottom, we start at 3.9-ish, and we don't lose as much, but yeah, this one only is lost a couple hundredths. Some of them you lose about a tenth. And this is not after like a year of driving. This is after about a month of driving. And so it doesn't take long for these axles to get worn to the point where the wheels are just shaking the car. Here's a hub carrier with bearings installed. And I'm still waiting on my new axles, but this one is less worn, let's say. And when this is in there, and this feels way better than it looks, but it's much smoother. There is almost no wobble. But it is important to note that if you, like I said, I'm waiting on new axles, because if I were to take this axle and put it in new bearings, you would still have a lot of play because this is worn down. So you're not going to completely solve the problem if you don't replace your worn axles. The other thing you can do is simply replace the bearings before you drive the car as soon as you get it, and then you don't have to order new axles when the time comes. So that is the best way to go. I obviously didn't know that was going to happen when I bought the cars, so I had to get new axles when I replaced the bearings. But again, this is not an essential upgrade, but the wobble in the wheels just kind of offends my sensibilities, I guess you'd say. And when they drive so nice and clean with the bearings, it's hard not to go for this upgrade. So highly recommended, not essential. These bearings, not supplied by the manufacturer. They do not supply bearings. Well, I should take that back. They supply the big bearing. They do not supply the little bearings. These are standard bearing sizes. The smaller one is 8 millimeter outer, 4 millimeter inner, and then 3 millimeters wide. And they call it an 8x4x3 bearing. This is 12 millimeter outer by 8 millimeter inner, and it's 3.5 millimeters wide. So there are a couple cars that use the same bearings for the hub carriers. The WL Toys A959 is one that does it. So you can get a set of bearings from Amazon, or I think from Banggood, for the 959 cars, and it will have 4 small ones and 4 big ones. I think those are about $9. If you're in the States and you're looking to get it from a hobby shop, the Traxxas Mini eRevo, the 1/16 scale, uses the same size bearings in their hubs. So you can get a Mini eRevo hub bearing kit, and it will have all the same bearings that you need. So if you buy the bearings individually, they come in like stacks. I had a bunch of cars, and before I figured out you could just buy kits, I just bought stacks of bearings, and I'm using most of them because I'm passing them around through several cars. So you can get these in like packs of 10, and you can just buy them individually if you want to. Okay, one more quick note on part compatibility. It would be terribly convenient if you could get these axles somewhere else. These are the axles for the A959 series again. It's a very similar car. We're using the drive shafts and we're using a couple other things. And these are so close to being a drop-in replacement, but they don't quite do it. They have the same large bearing diameter and they have the same small bearing diameter. They have a different thread size, which is not a big deal. The stock is an M3 thread. This is an M4 thread. Honestly, the M4 thread would probably be preferable because you probably get better nut retention. We have had the nuts fall off of these cars a few times when we're driving them around. The problem is this hole, and this is the hole that the pin goes through to hold on the hex nut. And it is in a different location on the WL Toys axle than it is on the stock axle. And that, half a millimeter difference is enough to make it incompatible with the car, because when you put it into the hub carrier, the hole does not come out the other side. So, and this bearing, it looks like it's sticking out, but it is seated all the way in there. So you can't get your pin in, can't get your hex nuts on. This just won't work with the car. So, a couple closing thoughts. Would I still recommend this car, knowing that I had to do $35 or $30 worth of upgrades to it to keep it running? And I would say maybe. I guess you have to realize that whenever you buy an RC car, there's always going to be upkeep costs and stuff you have to do to it to keep it running. Even if you buy mainline name brand parts or cars, you're going to have to buy replacement parts. I mean, I already talked about how the differential in this is the same as the $120 Latrax Teton differential, and people complain about those differentials all the time and how they're always replacing them. So it's not as if you buy a more expensive car, you're going to have no maintenance on it or it'll run forever. That's just not the case. This car might have more maintenance, and it's probably had maintenance sooner than another car. But thinking that if you spend more money on another RC, you're not going to have to do any maintenance and save yourself a bunch. I don't know if that's a case you can make. The biggest drawback to this vehicle is probably part support, and that is a big factor you should consider when buying a car. Most of the parts for this, at least if you're just going to buy from manufacturer, from Banggood, so they're cheap, but you got to wait a long time to get them. And otherwise, you're going to do what I did, which was try out a bunch of parts that looked like they might fit from other lines and eventually find something that works. So if you do buy another more mainstream car, you will have better part support. You don't need to buy an expensive car like WL Toys. Most of their cars you can get parts for on Amazon. I mean, there's just tons of parts for the A959 vehicles. Their 14401 buggy is really popular. There's tons of parts for that around, and those are not expensive. They're a little more than this car, but they're not as expensive as a Traxxas or something like that. So I think I would probably try to stick to a budget car like that rather than this. However, if you got this truck and you're trying to work with what you got, then hopefully you found some of this stuff helpful. I might be putting out some additional videos covering optional upgrades like tires, and I did some work on the batteries for these, and yeah, so as I learn more about these cars and what parts you can make work on them, I might put out another video or two. In the meantime, if you have any questions about part compatibility, feel free to leave it in the comments. If you found parts on your own 183XX cars that work that I haven't mentioned yet, please mention it for other users. And I think that'll be it for me. I will see you guys later.